You're watching GAB with Elisa Profiles on MetroCast Channel 10. Thanks for coming back. We have a great show, and I don't want to gush, but this is just so very interesting, the history and the artifacts that Southern Maryland has to offer up. And our guest today is Dr. Stephen Godfrey, who's the paleontologist at the Calvert Marine Museum. And we're kind of backstage, if you will, in what you call the collections room for the museum.
Yes.
How many pieces, because we've looked at a lot of teeth and skeletal remains and skulls and what have you, how many pieces do you think, fossils do you have here?
So there are tens of thousands of specimens that we've collected along the cliffs and cataloged here. Okay. So they would include fossils, the microfossils, the little tiny things that you have to examine under a microscope, all the way up to whale skeletons. Skulls of whales, that sort of thing, the full gamut.
Now, we were looking at some pieces earlier, and you said that you have a collection here at the Calvert Marine Museum which rivals that of the Smithsonian.
It's very comparable, yes, in terms of the numbers of skulls that we've collected.
Skulls, okay, that's what it is.
Along the cliffs, yes.
Okay, that's great. And that's what Calvert Cliffs has a lot to offer, is a lot of whales, dolphins, sharks, just really a lot of the marine life.
Amongst paleontologists, it's world famous fossil locality.
Oh,
yeah, it's very important.
You have a great job.
Yeah.
You really do. Well, you mentioned earlier that your mandate here at the Calvert Marine Museum is to collect, preserve, and interpret.
Yes.
Okay, so you do a lot of collecting, go out to the Calvert Cliffs or the area, what have you, and you collect, and you have a lot of volunteers that help with preservation?
Yes.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about that. What do they do?
They mostly use dental scalers and brushes to remove the sediment. We're very fortunate in that the sediments in which the fossils are entombed, in which they're buried, are not cemented for the most part.
Okay.
They're soft. You can go up and you actually use your fingernail to remove the sediment from around the fossils. So it's that ease. And sort of amongst vertebrate paleontologists, we're very fortunate. We don't have to use jackhammers, scribes, to remove the sediment from around the fossils. So once the fossils have been prepared, we place them in archival jackets like we have here. And this evenly cradles the fossils so that we can store them and house them in perpetuity.
That's great. So these finds are going to be here for our children and our grandchildren to be able to study, interpret, and really have a full picture of history.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's talk about the interpretation, because this brings us, if you will, to the human interest part of the program, where you have some fossils and pieces, and you've been able to make some interpretations.
Right. So the fossils that we have on the table show interactions between different kinds of extinct animals.
Okay.
So we'll begin with this one. This is a tail vertebra of a dolphin, of an extinct kind of dolphin, and we know that it's a tail vertebra from its shape. It's very characteristic, so there's no mistaking that.
Okay.
But what this fossil also preserves are these deep gouge marks on either side of the back of the vertebra. And so when you find a fossil like this, once you spend any time looking at fossils, you immediately recognize that these gouge marks were not likely made by humans trying to dig it out of the cliff. These gouge marks were actually made by a megalodon shark, so the extinct giant white shark, when it bit down onto the tail of this dolphin, and the vertebra actually became wedged between two adjacent teeth. So here is a megalodon shark tooth.
Goodness gracious.
It's actually an upper tooth, so I should hold it like this.
Okay, now is this tooth from what you would characterize as a fully grown megalodon, or is this a younger one?
No, this is a larger tooth. There are larger teeth known. They actually get up to about 7 inches, but those are exceedingly rare.
Goodness. Okay.
This one is just over 5 inches long.
Okay.
And what this fossil proves is that this dolphin, at the end of its life, because there's no evidence of healing here, was bitten by a megalodon. And you can see that as the jaws clamped around the tail, the teeth came down, and the bite was forceful enough that the serrations along the edge of the tooth actually gouged and cut their way through the bone, through the fresh dolphin bone. And actually, the jaws were opened up again, and the tooth came down because there are 2 cuts on this side.
So you can tell that the tail of this dolphin was actually bit twice.
Yes, and the tail was inside the mouth of the megalodon. Okay, and you can see that 2 adjacent teeth, this bone would then fit between 2 adjacent megalodon teeth.
Oh, goodness gracious.
So that proves that megalodon bit this dolphin. So here, that's the interaction between this poor dolphin and this giant white shark.
But the other thing you told me is you know that the tail was not bitten off and eaten. It wasn't eaten by the megalodon.
This vertebra, because of its pristine condition, was not swallowed by the shark.
Okay.
Okay. If it had been swallowed, the acids in the shark's stomach would have disintegrated, degraded the quality, the caliber, or probably completely dissolved this bone. Mm-hmm. So it would not have survived going through the digestive system of Megalodon. It bit it, and for whatever reason, this bone in whatever part of the carcass escaped, the shark's notice, then sank to the bottom, mm-hmm. was buried by sediment, mm-hmm. and fossilized.
And that helps you really understand the behavior as it relates between dolphins in the water and megalodons, because biting tails, is that what you think was a standard behavior from predator to prey?
Right. Based on the behavior of the living great white shark, they will either attack the abdominal region to eviscerate them, mm-hmm. or they bite the tail to prevent the dolphin from swimming away. Okay. And they want it to bleed to death.
Them.
Yeah, mobilize them. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it's a lot easier to eat an animal that's not struggling against you.
Mm. That's nature. That's and I love how you're able to take a piece like that and really have an understanding about it. We have a couple minutes left in this segment. Let's talk about this. This is a beautiful fossil.
This is the skull of a juvenile or subadult, maybe teenager dolphin.
Okay.
And what you're looking at is the underside of the skull. This is the roof of the mouth, and you can see that here we see the tooth sockets. Now, it's not uncommon in dolphins for the teeth to fall out. They're not really welded in, firmly held into the socket, so they can fall out after the animal dies. My interest in this skull is that you'll notice here is the right eye socket.
Okay.
Here is the left eye socket. Now we're missing the bottom of the skull, but this is where the brain would have been, and these two openings are where the nostrils would have come from the top of the head, from the blowhole, down through, and then into the trachea. Mm-hmm. You'll notice that in on this side of the skull, there are these gouge marks. Mm-hmm. Those gouge marks were actually made by a shark that was biting the head of this dolphin and killed it. What's more, the force of the bite was so strong that a tip of a tooth became embedded in the bone of the eye socket and broke off. And if you just touch right there, you can feel the tip of that tooth still really embedded right in the bone. Now, obviously, the shark that bit this dolphin was not a megalodon. It was a much smaller shark, probably a gray shark.
Okay.
So that would be like a bull shark, a dusky, a silky, a shark that would be in anywhere from 6 to 9, maybe 10 feet long.
Okay, why obviously was it not a megalodon? Because of the size of the...
The size of the bite marks, and obviously the tip of that tooth is very tiny.
Oh, that's right, because this one would have left a hunk of tooth if it had.
Yeah, it would have severed the skull in half, or it would have swallowed the dolphin whole.
Goodness gracious, okay, that makes sense.
And this graphic actually was done by one of our resident artists, and it shows a rendering of what may have happened, a feeding frenzy, or this dolphin was obviously bit.
And you said this might have been a gray shark?
Yes, that's the general.
Based on the size of the bite.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
Size and the morphology of the tip of the tooth that's embedded in there, we can tell what kind of shark it was.
Well, your skills at interpretation are incredible, and you have wonderful stories. And I know we have another story that's really, really interesting. You won't believe it. You have to see it. I've heard this story because we talked about it before we started taping, and it's really interesting, and you learn a lot about behaviors between animals. So I tell you what, if you don't have a drink already, grab one and come back and sit down, because you're going to want to see the next segment. We'll be back in a moment. You're watching Gab with Elisa Profiles on MetroCast Channel 10.